kick this meeting off. Wonderful. Well, welcome everybody. This is the first of 3 neighborhood meetings about redesigning the city's leaf collection program. My name is Dave the Kid. I'm the Director of Innovation, and I'm the facilitator and project manager for the city's innovation team who are working on this project. I want to thank you all for participating and coming tonight. I know that we're inundated with Zoom meetings and public meetings, so I really appreciate your participation and your input tonight. Tonight, we're going to give a lot of information about the current program, why we are wanting to change it, why now, how you can be involved, and we'll also introduce you to some of the innovation team from the city who are working on this. So lots of information in the first half hour. I should note that the entire meeting is being recorded and we'll link to from the project page in case you want to reference it later or send it to someone else to watch. The second half of the meeting will be reserved for you, for your questions. And even though we've got Q&A positioned at the back end of the presentation, you're welcome to enter your questions in the Zoom chat function as we go along, and we'll look at those when it's time for Q&A, or you can use the raise hand function that we just figured out how to use when we get to the Q&A portion of this. And before getting into the presentation, I want to thank one of our innovation team members working behind the scenes, Holly McLaughlin. She's the public affairs specialist for the City of Bloomington Utilities, and she's managing our Zoom for us tonight. So big thanks to Holly for stepping into that role. There are also a few ground rules I want to make sure that everyone's aware of. When you arrive tonight, both your audio and video were turned off. And if you wouldn't mind, please keeping them off until the Q&A at the end of the presentation. We'll let you know how to participate in the Q&A when we get to that point. Video will be enabled for the city employee speakers while they're speaking, but we'll turn our video off when we're not speaking. So you'll see some people kind of come on and off screen. And note again that this meeting is being recorded, and we'll have a link to the recording on the project page tomorrow. And the project page that I keep on referring to is the URL that's at the very bottom of this screen. And it's bloomington.in.gov/innovate/2020-leaves. Next slide, please. So again, thanks to those of you who are participating tonight, and a big thank you to all of you who took the survey that we sent out in late July and early August. It was really interesting from the responses that not everyone was clear on how the city's leaf management operates right now. So we're gonna start by describing how it works currently, and then we'll move into some of the other topics of why we want to change, why now, and what some of you said in that survey. The current city leaf management strategy is to collect leaves from residents in 2 ways. Option number 1, which you can kind of see a representation of in the slide, is to collect them from yard waste bags and bins. And option number 2 is using the vacuum trucks to suck up the leaves that are raked to the curb. So in January through March, there's actually no leaf or yard waste collection because the crews that would be on leaf duty are also used for snow removal and street sweeping during that time. In April through December, so almost year round, residents can rake leaves into paper yard waste bags or into yard waste bins and leave them at the curb for pickup on their trash day. In April through October, there's a $1 per bag or per bin fee that's added to your utility bill. But in November and December, there's no additional charge to pick up these bags or the bins. It should be noted that the leaves that are collected in bags and bins, they actually go to the landfill. So people were wondering what happens to leaves. For leaves collected in this way, they go to the landfill. Nope. Next slide, please. The second option is using the vacuum trucks to suck up the leaves that are raked to the curb. The vacuum trucks are used in November and December. Residents rake their leaves to the curb and they wait for a vacuum truck to come around and collect them. In years past, depending on the weather, the vacuum trucks would make 2 passes, one earlier in the season and one later. The schedule for leaf collection depends on when the paving season ends and when the snowplow season begins. The same crews that pave and plow are also used for leaf collection, with the addition of 6 part-time seasonal workers that are added during leafing season. So the timing of leaf collection season is defined by when we have the human resources and the equipment available to collect the leaves, not necessarily when the leaves are ready to be collected. Because we use the same trucks for leafing and snow plowing, if there's snowfall during the November-December timeframe, it can take a half of a workday to convert the vacuum truck to a snowplow, and then another half a day to convert it back to a leaf vacuum truck when plowing is done, if there are still leaves that need to be collected. Once a freeze happens, the work of vacuuming the leaves becomes a ton harder because the leaves freeze in chunks and they're often too big or too heavy to be vacuumed. So they have to be broken up before they can be vacuumed. Sometimes yard waste like sticks and branches can clog or damage the vacuum mechanism and can contribute to some additional downtime for the trucks. For vacuumed leaves, once a vacuum truck is full of leaves, it drives to a compost drop-off point and dumps the leaves there. In the city, we currently only have 1 certified compost site, so no matter where you are in the city, if your truck is full, you drive to that one location, which may be very near where you're working, or it may be across town. There are a few farms who can take 1 or 2 loads of leaves for use on their land, but the majority of the 356 loads get trucked to the compost site. On the right-hand side of the screen, you can see a version. It's actually when the leaf collection is complete, that when that screenshot was taken, but it's an interactive map that the city maintains on the website to indicate what the current pickup zone is, what the next zone is, what the upcoming zone is, and any of the remaining zones. And then in each zone, the streets themselves are color-coded so that you know when a pickup is in progress, when odd and even sides of the street have been complete, and when pickup hasn't yet started. And with regard to the vacuum collection, there's never been an additional fee charged to residents for this service. And now I'll hand it over to another member of the innovation team, Angela Van Roy.
Hi, I'm Angela Van Roy. I am the Neighborhood Services Program Manager for the Department of Housing and Neighborhood Development, commonly known as HAND, as well as a member of this innovation team. So, question is, why do we want to change the leaf collection program? The decision to make a change is based on information that we heard from you, as well as information from City Council and City Administration. First, what do residents say? Through interviews with residents and from nearly 400 of you who completed the survey about this service, we heard a number of concerns, including 1, that collection crews arrive in your neighborhood too early, sometimes even before the trees have dropped their leaves. 2, the collection crews arrive in your neighborhood too late. By this time, the leaf piles have blown all over the neighborhood, created slick sidewalks, and clogged the storm drains. 3, you don't know when the collection crews will be coming in your neighborhood. The interactive map on the website isn't specific enough, especially if there's a change due to weather. Phone calls to the Public Works Department increase exponentially in November and December, and most of these calls are about leaf collection. Finally, some people like the service as it is and aren't sure what they would do if the city didn't pick up their leaves. Others don't use the service at all and prefer to mulch or compost their leaves. Next slide, please. From the perspective of the City Council and City Administration, there are also a number of concerns that support the need to rethink leaf collection. These include, 1, leaf collection is expensive. It costs nearly $520,000 per year in equipment, fuel, labor, and composting fees. 2, it is very difficult to keep the program sufficiently staffed. 5 out of 6 part-time seasonal employees that are hired to do this job will quit before the season ends. The job of raking and collecting leaves is intensely physical, especially if the weather gets cold and the piles freeze and need to be broken up before they can be vacuumed. 3, the current program is not in keeping with our climate action goals. The trucks use diesel fuel, run 8 hours per day, 5 days per week for at least 2 months out of the year. 4, the equipment has multiple uses. The vacuum-equipped trucks are also used for plowing snow, so a snow in November or December will delay the already small window of opportunity for leaf collection. Finally, phone calls to the Public Works Department can be overwhelming in November and December. Shifting weather conditions and the inexact pickup schedule creates frustration for many users of the service who call the city wanting to get more accurate information about their pickup date. Next slide, please. So we have a service that costs a lot of money. It's hard to staff. It operates on a small time frame that doesn't necessarily coordinate with the schedules of our residents and the trees themselves. And it doesn't further our climate action goals. But these have been true for some time, so why the need to make a change right now? There are 2 answers: money and our commitment to the environment. The leafing service is funded through the motor vehicle tax. Revenue from this tax fluctuates according to the cost of fuel and how much of it people use. This spring, due to the shelter-in-place order, we saw a decrease in vehicle usage, and that decrease in demand also lowered the price per gallon. Both of these factors decreased revenue. On one hand, this is great news. We want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and decreasing vehicle miles traveled and fossil fuel use is how we do that. On the other hand, the city has less money available to fund the leaf collection program. So taken together, these factors make now a great time to ask whether there's a way we can lower the cost to operate this service. Now I will hand it over to Beth Rosenbarger.
Hi, I'm Beth Rosenbarger with the Planning and Transportation Department and also a member of the innovation team. So this slide focuses on what we want the program to address in terms of a leafing program. In our understanding of leafing, there are 3 key things a leafing program will need to address in order to be successful. First, schedules. The schedules of residents and the schedules of trees. We realize that residents all have different schedules and life demands. And in addition to the financial and environmental costs of the leafing program, we want to consider resident schedules. Whatever strategy that we pursue to manage our leaves, we realize that in order for it to work, the strategy or new program needs to match up to when residents are able to collect their leaves. And that is also dependent on when leaves actually fall from trees. So both of those schedules. Second, storm drains. We know we want to prevent leaves from clogging storm drains and from making sidewalks and streets slick. Whoop. One more, thanks. And third, year-round considerations or close to it. So just like my dog sheds fur most of the year, trees can too. It's not just in autumn that we have nature's litter to address. It's not like it's bad, but we know that we need to do something with it. And you'll see here, we don't have any specific strategies listed, and you'll note that we specify managing leaves. It may be that leaves don't need to be collected, but just managed in a different way. Who knows? And we're open to all sorts of ideas. Next slide, please. So it turns out that we're not the only city with trees. I know it's not shocking, but we do have more trees than most cities our size in the Midwest. And while we all understand that Bloomington is a unique snowflake, it makes sense to learn from other communities to find out what they do. So here are a few ways that other cities are managing their leaves. Some cities use a vacuum and curbside bag pickup combo program. similar to ours, and some of these programs charge residents an additional fee and some don't. Some cities only offer pickup of bagged leaves. Most of these programs use a pay-as-you-throw fee structure so that you pay for the amount of the pickup service that you use, so paying per bag or per time they're collected or both. And there are some cities that manage one or more composting sites where you can drop off bagged leaves. Some of these programs have additional fees and others do not. Many of these programs have the added benefit of supplying residents with free mulch that they can pick up from the same location. So where the composting takes place, providing mulch is an option as well. And finally, some cities encourage mulching or composting in place, either through pay-as-you-throw fee structure or low or no cost composting structures or leaf shedding equipment. So really encouraging the cities or the leaves to be managed on site. Next up is Kevin Curran.
Thank you, Beth. Hi, I'm Kevin Curran, Director of Auditing and Finance Systems for the city, and a member of this innovation team. So in addition to considering what other cities are doing, we've collected some suggestions from many of you, and we've been documenting ideas that come up in the course of our interviews and research. It may be the case that our leaf management strategy needs to contain multiple options in order to manage all of the leaves in our tree city. Here are a few ideas that might be considered as options. One option might be to submit a U report to schedule pickup when you have raked all your leaves to the curb, got bags of leaves ready for pickup. You get a compost bin, and you get a compost bin, and you get a compost bin. Basically, we could divert the money that would be spent on this program to supply compost in place containers at every dwelling. Next slide, please. Third option might be to check out an electric mulching mower that is owned and maintained by the city. Mulch your leaves, then return the mower to the fleet location when you're done. Another possibility might be to identify additional drop-off options such as local farms or additional composting sites to make the process more convenient for residents and more efficient for the city. Now I'll hand it back to Dave Takid.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, everybody. I want to note that the suggestions that Kevin just went over, if some of you are having a strong reaction one way or another to the suggestions, at this point in the process, all we're doing is opening our brains to new ideas, which is what our second meeting will be all about. Before I get into that, I just want to make this connection between what we're doing with this project and the city's comprehensive plan. It's a little bit wordy, but goal 1.6 talks about the role of public engagement and how it can be used to improve city services. I'm going to read it. It's a little wordy, so hang in there with me. It says, commit to and plan for transparency, open government, and effective, accessible, and inclusive public engagement so that exemplary services are provided to our residents, businesses, nonprofit organizations, and our visitors, while also promoting more participatory citizenship. So that's it's a very thorough but long-winded way of saying that we want to involve you in developing one or more solutions that we recommend to Public Works for the 2021 season regarding the management of our leaves. So tonight's meeting again is very informational. We're providing you with a foundation so that you understand what the current status is, why we want to change, why now, and as Beth was mentioning earlier, what we're going towards, what the future, a good future might look like. In the next meeting, that's actually scheduled for this coming Tuesday, September 15th from 7 to 8:30, We'll use a design thinking exercise that we learned as a group in our innovation training to engage you in actively brainstorming some new ideas. And I'm seeing some stuff that's happening in the chat already, which is wonderful. Information on how you can participate in this meeting can be found on the project page, and the URL is at the bottom of this screen, bloomington.in.gov/innovate/2020-leaves. You'll get tired of hearing me say that because we've got a lot in this presentation. A quick note about this meeting, because we're in this virtual environment with COVID, we will be conducting this virtually. You will need an internet connection and a computer to participate. However, we have also made space for face-to-face participation using safe physical distancing and masks. If you are a person who is not all that tech savvy, or maybe you don't have the right equipment, you can register to join this working group. We've got 15 spaces that we're making available there. This will be at the Cascades Golf Course Clubhouse, and you can find information about that on the project page. You do need to register to claim one of these spots because, again, we want to make sure that we're being safe with everybody. You can register on the project page, or you can just send me an email or give me a call and I'll make sure that you're registered. My contact information will be on the very last slide of the presentation today. The innovation team, some of whom you've met tonight, will then take the most promising newly brainstormed ideas from that second meeting and add them to the list that we have and evaluate which ones we move forward with to prototyping because they show the greatest potential for impacting the financial and or the environmental cost, and or they help better align the resident schedules with the trees and the leaf management strategy. So the second meeting is about really brainstorming, generating ideas. Even if they sound unattainable, that's fine, because we're going to iterate, we're going to test them out, we're going to evaluate them, and eventually come down to the ones that are actionable and that we want to pilot. Next slide, please. Once we have some promising ideas, then the city's innovation team for this project will work with members of the Park Ridge and the Spicewood neighborhoods who are willing to be part of this experiment. And we'll physically walk through some of those top ideas. And again, these ideas at this point may be, they may sound unattainable, unactionable, but we're looking for that part of the idea that might be actionable. So it's okay if it's a little out there at the beginning. Once we've physically walked through the top ideas to get a sense for how they might work or how they might need to be modified, then we'll end up with selecting one or two really promising ideas that we want to pilot this year. And then in November and December, we'll use volunteer households from Spicewood and Park Ridge to try out those ideas in real time and document what worked, what didn't work, and what could be improved. Next slide, please. And then finally, we'll reassemble in January in a third public meeting, kind of like this one, to go over what did work, what didn't work, and get input from you on what we recommend that Public Works consider trying in 2021. So we're almost at halfway through our time together. I'm really glad that we kept it at that 30-minute mark. And we've given you a lot of things to think about, a lot of information. And now we'd like to open it up for questions. So if you'd go to the next slide, Holly. Okay, so there are some comments and some questions in the chat. I want to read off a couple of these so that if you can't access the chat for some reason, that you can still access this information. One user, Carl, says that we already have to pay for the bags if we choose to use them, so please don't make us pay for the pickup as well. We're hearing that managing our leaves as a tree city, that there is a concern about cost and equity, and we're definitely considering that when we're evaluating any of the solutions. James said that he kind of piggybacked on Carl's idea. Love it. Maybe the city can recycle some of its expense saving into paying for the bags. So I'm seeing that. There's a question from Glenn. Are there larger compostable bags that could be used so that the bagged leaves could still go to the compost facility? Michael, I'm wondering if you're on the line, if you can maybe answer that question.
Yeah, Defta. Michael Large, I'm the operations manager for the City of Bloomington's Department of Public Works. I would just like to thank everyone for coming tonight and just reiterate that all bagged leaves will be composted, whether they are picked up by sanitation or by the street department. They all will be composted.
Michael, can you speak to that idea of whether or not there are larger compostable bags that could be used?
So there are many varieties of bags that can be used for the leafing program. We don't have restrictions on the size of the bag. Simply though, it's more about ergonomics and being able to lift those bags into the trucks, and as they get wet, they will become heavier. So just be conscious of that as you fill the bags going forward.
That's a good point. Thanks. Carl has another comment. There should be some options for those of us who don't have the means to move the leaves from one location to another. No truck. I don't have a truck either, so I feel you, Carl. And we are looking at a lot of different options, some of which are about addressing the problem in place, as it were. So stay tuned. And if you're interested in contributing to that, please consider attending the second meeting that we have to brainstorm. Linda asks, how will we educate people in our neighborhood? Even with sharing your postcards and our neighborhood listserv, a lot of neighbors still put leaves in the street. Education of whatever program is definitely something that the group will discuss. And if you have specific thoughts about something that would be successful, Linda, please send us an email and we'll make sure that it is included in our future discussions. Okay, yeah, James asks, earlier it was stated that the bags of leaves go to the landfill. Michael said that they're composted. Just to clarify, all of the leaves are composted. I apologize for that misunderstanding in my slides. So I'd like to open it up now for anyone in here to either raise your hand or to unmute yourself and ask a question about this. We've been talking at you a lot, and we want to hear your voices in this as well, if you're open to it. So Stephen says, good to hear that all are composted. I like to hear identifying more compost sites. We're actually, one of the members of our innovation team is the Assistant Director of Sustainability, and that's something that she's interested in for a number of different reasons, and we are definitely looking at that. Linda asks if we pay Good Earth, and we do. Natalia asks, where are the leaves composted right now? And it may be further up in the chat than when you came on, Natalia, but it's at the Good Earth LLC that is located at 650 East Empire Mill Road. Keep on putting those questions in the chat. If that's how the group prefers to communicate, that's fine. You can also raise your hand if you would like Holly to call on you. We don't have that many people in the meeting tonight, so feel free to also unmute yourself and ask a question.
Hi, this is Jim Wiltz, and it won't let me do the video, which is fine. But obviously, part of this has to do with the finances, and you brought up the taxes and everything. What is the revenue shortfall in that tax collection? What is that projected to be?
Michael, would you feel comfortable addressing that?
So the way in which leafing is subsidized and paid for by the city comes from many different sources, but the shortfall currently is, given the year, anywhere from $150,000 to $400,000 that we subsidize. And once again, that's dependent upon the time of year that the leaves fall, the weight of the leaves, whether they're wet when they get transferred and unloaded at the facility. There's a lot of factors that get brought into that. Just out of average, though, just so you know, when they're running the leaves, they do 4 to 6 truckloads a day at $20 to $25 a truckload because we're paying by weight.
Okay, well, thanks for that answer, but that's about costs. So what's the revenue shortfall? Because you brought up the tax.
The revenue.
The revenue shortfalls from the tax collections that were brought up at the very beginning of the presentation, and it seems like we're headed downhill towards no curbside leaf collection. And I think that if we're going to be open about information, transparent, I'd like to know, as a taxpayer, how much taxes didn't come in through the, what you said it was gasoline tax or something like that. And yeah, it's great. People didn't drive. Unfortunately, we didn't get as many tax collection dollars. So what is that revenue shortfall? What are we talking about here?
So in terms of this year, that's obviously not going to be known until all the numbers come in for 2020. The number that I was speaking of was in regards to last year's full shortfall that we had to subsidize, and that was the $300,000.
Okay, but last year wouldn't have included COVID-related shortfall, which was the rationale behind this.
We began this project and program long before COVID was a thing. So this leafing program and this innovation task force that you're speaking with this evening, this was going to become a thing long before COVID was. So the program itself was looking for these innovative ideas from the community before we knew that we were going to suffer an even greater shortfall because of COVID.
Yeah, definitely exacerbated from COVID. So,
well, I do find that a little disappointing that wasn't brought up at the very beginning. Really, what it sounded to me like was this was a COVID-related thing, which we're all living through real issues right now with COVID. And so bringing that up as more or less kind of like the rationale, to me, is not very transparent when this process started before it. Now, that being said, maybe it's a bad deal for us to have curbside pickup, but I don't think that speaks very highly of the transparency.
Point taken. To get to the heart of your question, the cost of the program, when we're talking about the fees that we pay to Good Earth, the maintenance of the equipment, the labor, the fuel, all of that together costs roughly $520,000 a year. And what Michael was saying is that as of last year, we had a significant shortfall, and that's just been exacerbated during COVID because we have less revenue. And we can get more specific about the exact numbers, the financials on the project page.
Steve Akers has a question.
Hi, can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
I was just going to say, I don't have any really good ideas, but I'm really loving to listen to the ideas that we'll have in this session and the next. I do like Linda and a few other comments about maybe eliminating the vacuum truck and going back to the way it used to be with the bags at the curbside. Although that, again, I'm really sensitive to many of the neighbors who have a difficult time just physically doing such work, you know, putting it into the bags. But I feel like if we could eliminate the trucks, get the trucks back to Michael, and Michael doesn't have to, you know, try and hold on to the staff that end up quitting before the end of the season because they work so hard and it gets cold and then things freeze. But bagging everything up, and then you would still have to truck it, and then maybe finding Good Earth, Green Earth, Fable Farms, some other places that maybe could take some of the leaves, but at the same time figuring out how to help the neighbors that are just physically unable to do such work, and that the vacuuming is more of a convenience to just rake things out to the street. But I certainly feel for Michael and his staff when things freeze, and I've watched them for years, you know, try to pull things off this, you know, and then I'm the one in Park Ridge that a lot of times, hey, the leaves fell early, the leaves fell late, you know, with climate change, it's totally, you know, Michael's got to have a crystal ball to figure out when in the world the leaves are coming. And so the last 3 or 4 years, I've had to beg Michael and others to come back. Can you come back to Park Ridge? There's more leaves down, and they've done a miracle by coming back and doing that. So I guess my main comment is just I love hearing all these ideas, and hopefully we'll identify some alternatives. But at the same time, we have lots of retired folks and lots of people with different abilities to just manage all the leaves that we have in our Tree City neighborhood. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. And in the when the innovation team first began our work, we looked at the different stakeholders, and we definitely have as part of what we're considering people who physically aren't able to collect their own leaves for whatever reason. It might be that you work a third shift or you have multiple jobs. In addition, we know that the more senior population may have some challenges, and that we have differently abled people in our community as well. So that's definitely a consideration when we're thinking about the equity of the program. And I think when Angela was speaking, she was talking about we might need to consider multiple strategies like we have now. We do have multiple strategies with you can leave a bin or a biodegradable bag by the curbside, or you can have them vacuumed, or you can do both. Thank you. Linda asks, what's the difference between cost of vacuuming the leaves and picking up the bags? That is something that's some data that I don't think that we've got readily available, Linda, but for a lot of the questions that are being asked here tonight, we'll include those as FAQs on the project site. So I'll make a note of that and connect with Adam Wason, who's the Director of Public Works, which is the department that manages this program, and we'll make sure that that information is put out there.
And Linda also has another question.
Yeah, I asked that question because originally we did all bag pickup, and then the city switched, and I think their goal was hoping that vacuuming and education people would switch more to composting, and that definitely, as we all know, has not worked. As I've said, in our own neighborhood, you know, we actually have gutter patrol where everybody is responsible for certain sewer areas for when it rains because they pile up with the leaves. So I'm just wondering, you know, what was the difference in the cost and why did we switch? I was hoping it was going to be an educational purpose, but we know that we have failed on that part, and it looks like it's also an expensive process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good question. And when we were asking people who had worked in the streets program that is responsible for the leaf collection, and we asked, when did vacuum leaf collection start? And the institutional memory was, I think this is the way that it's always been done. And so there wasn't a memory for why did we switch over to vacuuming, or what did we do prior to vacuuming?
Well, actually, before vacuuming, believe it or not, the city at one point actually even supplied us with the bags. You could go to the fire departments, and this has all been since the year 2000, because we've only been in our house since 2001. So it's only been in the last 19 years, but for several years, the city actually even supplied the bags. So you could go to the different fire departments and they'd be sitting out on a table and you could take as many as you want. And we all bagged up our leaves. Then as we started talking about the environment and doing more composting, at some point there was a transition of hoping people would compost, and they did the leaf pickup with the vacuum. So the vacuum hasn't always been present.
Okay, well, I was born and raised in Bloomington. This is Jim again. And I grew up in Park Ridge. We used to have vacuum a long, long time ago, and then it switched back to bags, and now it's back to vacuums. I mean, you know, the reality is it's expensive either way. I mean, Carl brought up the idea in the chat about buying bags. How many residences are there in Bloomington? Are there 30,000 or something? I don't know. So you divide that up. I mean, how much do I have to pay for bags at the grocery store to fill up to take care of all my leaves? I'm guessing that it's probably about a wash, except instead of the city paying for it, now I'm paying for it. I'm not saying that's a crime, but these are pieces of information that I'm disappointed are not readily available. Like, what's the cost per resident? What would the cost per resident be if we were having to buy bags? How much would it cost if the city supplied bags? You know, for information, those are vital pieces of information, and I'm surprised that none of that seems to be readily available today.
Well, we're hearing from you all and understanding what information is valuable to you, and we'll make sure, again, we're keeping a project page in order to help everyone to connect to the project, and we'll keep it updated, and there will be an FAQ, and based on what we're hearing from you, we'll be adding information about that. James asked about leaf collection falling into the category of basic services. We are a tree city, and that means that we've got more leaves. So he's saying that these services should be funded in their entirety before the supplemental services favored by the mayor. So prioritizing leaf collection over a supplemental service. James, I'm wondering if you would be willing to define examples of what you're considering to be supplemental services. And I know that not everyone has a microphone on their computer. So if you don't have a microphone, James, if you wouldn't mind adding that to the chat. And while we're waiting for James, if anyone has any other questions. Thank you everyone for this, for your questions and your comments. And again, we didn't think of everything from the get-go. This is part of the community engagement process, is really understanding what are the data points that you value, because loading you down with data may make this a less accessible project, and we want everyone to feel connected to it. Okay, so James says, undefined climate change initiatives, public art, non-essential initiatives. Leaf collection falls into the category of basic services, and these should be funded before supplemental services. I'm not quite sure how to answer this. I'm going to put it out to my innovation team and see if anyone might be able to weigh in on this. So this may be, go ahead.
Sure, this is Beth Rosenbarger. I think one consideration is we haven't priced ideas because we're still asking for ideas. So I think, I don't know about the cost of electric mulching mowers or composters. We are aware that other communities have used those options, but I think for now, we do want people to feel open to share all the options without knowing cost, which I understand can seem ridiculous, but it's basically, this is a program that the taxpayers pay for every year through the gas tax. So I think a clarification about the gas tax is that, that's a main source for roads. And I think it's interesting that we use a portion of it for leafing. It's also just that it will always fluctuate as opposed to a different revenue source. So I can understand that you would want more data about other options, and we can collect more data about the program that exists now. But I think we just want to hear more ideas still. Thanks.
Thanks, Beth. And back to James's question about leaf collection being a basic service. I think that's one that the innovation team will need to take back and discuss a little bit more. That's one of the vulnerabilities of having a live meeting, is that there are going to be some questions asked that we don't have the answer to in the moment. An innovation project is very different from a traditional project, in the sense that with a traditional project, you know what your starting point is, you know your exact ending point, and then all you're doing is managing the effort from where you are to where you want to be, and you have all the information that you need. For an innovation project, we know what our current state is, we know what some of the barriers are, which we've identified as financial and environmental cost, and a lack of alignment with our climate variability and our resident schedules and the delivery of some kind of service to help us manage the leaves and keep them off of the streets and the sidewalks and the storm drains. That's what we know. And so we are opening it up to how might we. And so some people may feel very uncomfortable with the unknown. But that's where this innovation team is living in. That's our space right now, and collecting information about what is valuable to you. And one of the things that I'm hearing through James's questions and through some of your other comments are that this is a basic service, or this is something that is at the foundation of what you all believe that the city should be providing. So that's a high value, is can we do this without, in a way that doesn't go back and forth between this year we're vacuuming, this year we're bagging, and as someone had mentioned their history of living in Bloomington, that it had gone back and forth because of the cost, and that it seems like maybe that's a wash. So can we find a different way to manage the leaves that will help us be sustainable going forward? Because we are going to be growing more trees. We are going to be creating more leaves. We are going to be dropping more twigs and branches. So what are some options for managing this sustainably? Good, okay. So Natalia is asking what the city considers to be basic services: trash pickup, providing clean water, and etc. And I think that's a great question. I think that's something that is addressed in our budget hearings. So we definitely consider the safety of citizens to be a basic service, and providing clean water and trash pickup, our parks, providing those. But as far as providing a list of what the city considers to be basic services, I think that's something that is may be better addressed in the budget hearings that we just recently went through. So I encourage you to look on the budget page of the city's website, and there's tons and tons of information about what kinds of services the city supplies and which of those are core and key and which are supplemented. So,
John Meskar has a question.
okay.
Hi, I guess I don't think I have a question so much as just a comment, just to add to the dialogue. It somewhat echoes what Steve Baker said, that I'm definitely interested in seeing what could be different, and it is important to make sure that it is very reasonable and important, responsible, I guess is the right word, to make sure that it's compared to some kind of base, such as the current service or previous services, but acknowledging that values and choices might change over time. In our case, the service, while it does function, it feels like most everything you said there is accurate in the case for where I live, where it's usually too early, and then it's also usually too late, both in the same season, and then also usually there are calls. And so if there was it does seem like it's, in our case at least, it seems like it's right for a change. Doesn't mean the right change will happen, but we'll just have to see what happens. So I'm excited to see how that goes. And also, as kind of a point of interest or more pointed question, is that I happen to live close to a city property, and it's a city property that kind of falls outside of the residential pickup system. And so that's something that I would like to see addressed. And others who live closer to city properties might have that same issue, where that city property has a lot of trees on it, park, and that's great. And then, but there's no neighbor to like work with. It's a different kind of neighbor to work with to get the leaf taken care of there, and then that has spillover to the whole area that I and my neighbors live in.
Right, sure.
And just that's all.
Thanks, John. Yeah, I encourage you to attend the second meeting if you can, and also the reason that we chose 2 neighborhoods instead of 1 is because there's different infrastructure in each of those neighborhoods, and there are different tree densities and tree species. We didn't select a neighborhood, I don't think, that is adjacent to a city-owned property, but I'll make a note of that this is one of the things that we need to consider going forward. Thank you. Glenn says this is essentially currently a free service to residents. Maybe it should be a fee added to water bill like trash pickup is. Thanks for your comment, Glenn. That's a comment that we saw a lot in the survey, that people were appreciative of the vacuum service because it allows them to not have to bag, even though it may not come at the right time of year. When it does come, they're thankful that their leaves are taken somewhere. And there were multiple offers throughout the survey of perhaps this is an additional fee that should be added. And Carl adds that there is no such thing as a free service because they are all paid for in one way or another. And that is true. As Michael mentioned, the funding for this program comes primarily from the motor vehicle tax. It also is supplemented through some other funding within Public Works. And Terry adds, he likes the public meeting idea where there can be new ideas put on the table, not just asking for public response to an idea that's already decided. Thanks, Terry. Yeah, it speaks to the innovation space where there are some people who are going to feel very uncomfortable with it because this is a new way of doing things, of working with and starting with, here's the problem that we're trying to solve. what are all the different ways that we might be able to solve it, even if they're wild and crazy? And then what is at the intention of some of those ideas that might be actionable that we could possibly move forward with? So thank you for that, Terry. Glenn has another thought. Yard waste carts that are available for purchase do not seem to be widely used. Could that program be expanded and encouraged? Yes, that is also something that we heard a lot in the surveys of, if you didn't take the survey, some of the questions that were asked were, what is your experience of the current program? What's your experience of the timing of the current program? And what would you like to see improved, or what suggestions for improvement do you have? And that's where some of the ideas that I'm alluding to came through for sure. Michael mentioned the city property. Dave just said there isn't one in either neighborhood. What about the park at the corner of Glenwood West and Longview? Many trees. Not sure why Dave wanted to make this point. Michael, you're really familiar with the with those two neighborhoods. Can you speak to city property adjacent to Park Ridge and Spicewood?
Yeah, Data. So there is a park in the Park Ridge pilot. In fact, it is adjacent to Mr. Metzger's property. That is the city-owned property that he's speaking of. So he will get to participate and speak with the owners, being us. And in regard to Spicewood, you know, the paths are our city property. So once again, if we have planted street trees, then we are the ones responsible for those, which is why we, you know, take the leafing situation. So.
Excellent. Good. Well, the selection of those two neighborhoods wasn't contingent on there being city property. So I'm glad to hear that we'll be able to take a look at that if, Michael, if you decide, Michael Metzger, or Mr. Metzger, if you decide to volunteer to be part of the prototyping or the piloting, then that would be really helpful so that we can test any of those parameters of what if the adjacent property is city owned and it's managed differently than private property. Okay, we're right at the end of our time. If you're anything like me, a lot of times you leave a meeting and you think, oh, why didn't I ask this question? And that's completely fine. So Holly, if you'll go to the next slide. This has my contact information and also, again, the URL for the project page. I've been taking a lot of notes as we've been talking, and we will establish an FAQ and answer some of the questions, especially as it regards to funding of the program. And if there's anything that we saw multiple times in here, we'll add those to the FAQs as well. But if you have a question, or if you, especially if you would like to participate as a volunteer neighborhood for either prototyping or piloting or both, and you live in Spicewood or Park Ridge, then please reach out. And my contact information is also on that same project page. So thank you. Everyone, for attending tonight. I really appreciate your presence, and I look forward to as many of you as possible who are able to participate in the second meeting. And again, that's this coming Tuesday from 7 to 8:30. So it will be a 90-minute meeting, and we will break out into small groups using Zoom and have more intimate chats, and it'll be a lot of fun generating new ideas to this core problem that we're trying to solve with our leafing program. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And innovation team members, if you wouldn't mind staying on for another 10 minutes and we'll debrief. Great, some really good comments. Okay, I think we're down to the innovation team plus Dana. So, okay. I'd really be interested, Dana, if you wouldn't mind just giving an overall of how the presentation overall went. And we'll talk about the presentation and then the Q&A portion separately, if that's okay.
Yeah, I thought your presentation was good. I'm not surprised what I heard.